Tonight's discussion is about MPs' expenses. Is it a bad thing or a good thing? Do we need to move on, or shall we just carry on naming and shaming those MPs? To discuss this and more, of course, reinstate public trust in our political system, we've got three very eminent guests here. Let me start with our first guest, on my furthest right, Angela Brooks, British Taxpayers Federation. Angela, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
What is it that your organization, what do you do, British Taxpayers Federation?
We sort of do the reverse of what's happening with the MPs at the moment. We defend taxpayers who are accused by HM Revenue and Customs, formerly known as the Inland Revenue, when they're accused of over-claiming their expenses and under-declaring their income. And because HM Revenue and Customs don't have to prove their case, they just have to say, we believe you're paying too little tax, it's then up to the taxpayer to defend their position. And basically my job is to help them to defend their position against an unfair or overladen tax burden.
And I suppose you make a bit of money in that process?
Very little. What I've always tried to provide is a fixed cost solution for the taxpayer, because normally you're paying a solicitor or an accountant by the hour, and tax appeal cases and tax inquiry and investigation cases can go on for months and months, if not years, sometimes as much as 10 years. And when the clock's running, it's costing you an awful lot of money without any guarantee that you're going to win. So I was trying to provide a solution whereby the taxpayer knew he would only ever have to pay a fixed amount, irrespective of how many months or years the case went on.
We'll charge you for this advert.
Not too much, I hope.
I'm just joking. Then we have Joe Shaw. Have I pronounced it correctly?
You have, yes.
Correct. Liberal Democrat candidate for Holborn and St Pancras. Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
I don't need to ask what you do for a living. Or I could. What do you do for a living?
I'm a barrister.
Okay, well, lawyer. Good. We like that. Tim Archer, you've been here before.
Evening.
Conservative candidate for Popular and Limehouse. Good evening to you. Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Good. Well, we need to talk about what's happening in our country. Have we lost complete trust, or have public lost complete trust in our political system, is the question.
Well, I think it's not quite as simple as that.
Okay.
The problem is that the rules are not clear, and it has never been clear either to David Cameron or to Gordon Brown, let's face it, just who had actually broken the rules, and just who had simply offended the public by claiming for things like helipads and moats and duck houses.
Duck houses.
And I think nobody has ever really understood the rules. And if you look at the rules, you can see that there's, for example, there's a couple where the husband and the wife, a baroness, somebody whose name escapes me, both claimed their full allowances for the same house. Well, as far as I can see, it doesn't actually preclude you from doing that. Common sense and decency should preclude you from doing that.
Because they're individually two different MPs.
Yes.
Two different parliamentarians.
That's
Just because
right.
they're married, it doesn't necessarily make them one MP.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and therefore, by that logic, they should have the right to, of course, claiming separate allowances.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's logical. Okay, Joe, I want to get you in, Angela. So here you have our electorates have complete, or lost at least, according to one, faith in the system. They've degraded them to becoming below or lower than some of the corrupt regimes of the world. I remember one guy talking about how corrupt Nigerian politicians have been and how they've been always taking the mick. Now the Nigerian politicians are looking at him and saying, hey guys, we're not the only ones, we told you, yours are as corrupt, except they've been using sophisticated terminologies to hide, we're just honestly corrupt. What do you make of that?
I think that's bang on the nail. He's absolutely right. And I think it's a great shame for all of us here who say we're proud to be British. And we've always said that we have one of the best democracies in the world. We have one of the best systems of government in the world. And I think anyone who's ever said that or felt that is now hanging their heads in shame and saying, well, actually, I'm now ashamed of this country. I'm ashamed of what we've shown to the rest of the world. And that's how I personally feel about it.
Necessarily. Angela, a question for you. Sitting there where you are, not involved necessarily in electioneering, in quote-unquote, and forgive me, lady and gentlemen here, there, of course, have got a vested interest. You don't. What do you make of this? Do you think there is a possibility of us moving further forward under the current disgraceful episode of parliamentarians' expense saga?
My answer would have to be no.
There's no way forward.
I don't think there's any way forward unless there's a very radical change, and I think that that change has to take the form of making sure that the MPs are subjected to the same penalties that they subject taxpayers to. And that means all of the benefits that they have either fraudulently or mistakenly or dishonestly claimed have not only got to be paid back, but they also have to pay back at least 50%, if not 100%, in penalties, which is what Parliament says taxpayers have to do if they either deliberately or inadvertently underpay tax, plus the interest has to be paid, plus there has to be very severe sanctions. Some of the MPs were genuinely mistaken, didn't understand the rules or whatever, and have come forward and apologised.
But isn't it true that in the Parliament this was the done thing? You came into the Parliament, somebody senior would actually tell you, why aren't you claiming? It's your entitlement. There is no other way. This is normal. This is what we've done for years. What's the problem? Isn't that the done culture?
I wouldn't know. I'm not
You
in
don't know.
Parliament.
So you're both vigorously shaking your heads.
Well, because some have clearly milked the system. Others have actually done illegal things. Like, for example, we've seen Hazel Blears now, after the event, paying £11,000 or £13,000 to the taxman for not paying capital gains tax.
Isn't there an exemption to capital tax that she had to pay? Wasn't that what she understood?
She, as I understand the situation with Hazel Blears, it was that she designated one home as her second home for the purposes of getting repairs done to it, but then for the purposes of the taxman, and Angela would know about this much better than me, but for the purposes of the taxman, she said that was her main home, so she designated it in two different ways.
Okay.
And because of that, she was able to say...
So it was the same home she designated twice,
yes,
in two different ways.
One
So she lied,
one for the
right?
Commons authorities.
You
I'm
can't
not
have it
saying
both
that.
ways, can you?
One for the Commons authorities and one for the taxman.
Okay, a tax lady, or an expert, rather, taxman is what they're calling you, I'm not sure you are, but you're an expert on how we can, of course, ensure that people are paying the right amount of tax and not being overburdened. So what did Hazel Blears do wrong here?
Well, she lied.
Okay.
And she either defrauded the taxpayer or the taxman.
And what should be her sanction?
Well, I think she should be sacked. She should be made to pay back all of the capital gain that she avoided, and I think penalised 100% would be the only way forward for that. Plus, I think she needs to pay the interest on it. And I think to have her made a public example would be very good for this country.
Angela, what do you think of this salary? I mean, I know it's not your job, but, you know.
Well, it's...
£30,000?
Well, what Joe's saying is almost like having a representation from a union, and I think that anyone should have a right to have a say in what the remuneration package is. What they shouldn't have is the opportunity to abuse an expenses system. And the problem is that some MPs view the allowable expenses as just an extension of their salary. So the MP gets £65,000 a year, plus is allowed a further £23,000, which they can claim or not, depending on whether they choose to claim it. So some MPs say, well, of course I'm going to claim the whole 23 grand, but there's a whole list of MPs who say, no, I'm going to claim half of it or a quarter of it or none of it, and that's where the whole remuneration package becomes
So you think
difficult
the
and
salaries
complicated.
of MPs should be more reasonable than the current one?
I couldn't possibly...
Higher or lower than 30,000?
I couldn't possibly say. I mean, bearing in mind, I would sack most of them, all of them who defrauded the taxpayer, I would sack. I think that they should be paid the going rate for the type of job that they're doing. And it is a difficult job because it's very harsh. You have to be put under a lot of pressure. You have to stay up till midnight in the House to vote. You have to work very unsociable hours, and you have to perhaps work miles away from your family if you're from Scotland or Wales or a different part of the country.
Let me go one at a time just to hear your views. Starting with you, Angela, what would be your proposal, apart from the two that has already come, as a way forward for us?
I'd like to see the taxpayer consulted in a very direct and very inclusive manner. There are lots of ways. We have the technology now. We've got Twitter, we've got Facebook. We can go out, we can ask the taxpayer what they think. We've just been doing that very thing with this television programme.
Yeah,
but I think the views of the taxpayer
there should be a referendum, in other
essential.
words.
I think we could do that very cheaply, very quickly, very easily using
The internet.
The internet, yeah.
Lovely. What about yourself, Joe? What would you like to say as a solution to go forward?
I think we need to give, in order for normal people to have trust in politicians, I think they need to feel that politicians listen to them and that they respect them. And I think that means we need a fairer voting system, because that means people's votes are taken into account in what happens in Parliament. And the thing I think I would urge your viewers is this, that in the elections coming up on the 4th of June, a low turnout will benefit extremist parties. What I'd like to see is that everyone in this country gets involved in politics, gets involved in their community and saying what matters to them, because that's how politics reflects the community. In Bangladesh, I think at the beginning of this year, there was an election and the turnout was about 80%. If we can get that in the elections coming up on the 4th of June, we'd be almost guaranteed that the BNP wouldn't get a seat anywhere in the country, and that would be a great thing.
And finally to you, Tim, what would be your solution?
Well, we need urgent reform. I think what we need to do there with the concept of expenses is we need to make sure that MPs are actually given the resources to do their job, which is to represent their constituents. And I think this is where we can actually learn from places like Bangladesh. When I was in Bangladesh last year, I was shown the block of flats opposite Parliament, where every MP is given a flat. They're given the same flat, well, one flat in a block of flats, and that is then their base in Dhaka. And we can learn a lot in terms of how our
basically
countries do it.
create an MP's hostel around the Parliament, that's where they live.
So could be no controversy about expenses, but at least they then have the resources to be able to do the job and represent people. And I think in terms of what we need to do next, once we've got reform and a clear way forward, we then need to have an urgent general election so that the people can decide.
I'm glad to know that it is about time Bangladesh began to teach Britain some good lessons about democracy. Well, things do change and things do go around. I'm also very happy to tell you that the world at large is looking at us quite deeply and with a magnifying glass, scrutinizing every move we're making, because we've made a claim. Our democracy is mother of all democracies. My God, what a claim. I'd feel embarrassed to make a claim like this. In fact, I never do. We say, and I should say, I say, our democracy is a good democracy. It's got a good system. It's got accountability and transparency within it. We've got press freedom who can bring account many of our politicians and public figures. But in this process, I believe, press may be at times overstepping their own boundaries. Who brings press to account? Unless we all mutually account one another, any democracy would fail. And unfortunately, what we have seen in the last few months and weeks have been precisely that. And I agree with our panelists, and I'm sure you do too. Unless we come out to vote on June the 4th, in the election coming up, it will be a great shame, and it will be victory handed over to extremist groups like BNP. So don't stay at home, do come out and vote. And that is the European election coming in on the 4th of June. Doesn't matter which party you vote for. Vote for somebody of your choice, even if you don't think they represent every bit of your interest. If they do represent most of it, go for it. Staying at home silently is not a choice. Next week, by the way, we want to talk about nuclear weapons and the race that has been opened up by North Korea yet today, blasting a bomb, testing it, much bigger than the bomb that was dropped by America on Nagasaki many, many years ago. We'll be talking about nuclear weapons and what we should do with it. Do stay tuned. My deep thanks to all my guests tonight, and to you for your phone calls and for your wonderful points. Do stay active in politics. Take care until next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.